So the cat is officially out of the bag. The Cincinnati Bengals have officially granted Trey Hendrickson permission to seek a trade. In this video, I want to go over what that exactly means, right? So the Bengals are operating in a way that they don't do quite often. We all know the Bengals tend to overvalue their players. They don't like to move off of their players. They like to have their players, especially the really elite ones, see the life of their contract. Uh, Trey Hendrickson and the Cincinnati Bengals have been negotiating for the better part of this entire offseason, trying to come to an agreement. Trey Hendrickson obviously still has a year left on his deal, so the Bengals still retain his rights. However, Trey Hendrickson wants more security, and that's just where things get a little weird, right? Because you think about it, Trey Hendrickson is going to be 31 years old, right? You look at it, Max Crosby just got paid a crap ton of money, which probably threw a wrench in their plans. Now, there are people out there that don't believe Trey Hendrickson can garner Max Crosby type of deal, and I understand that, right? Older guy, not elite in the run game, but truly a pass rush specialist. Here's one thing I can tell you: teams around the league will always look to pay to add a premium edge rusher, and we're not talking about just any premium edge rusher. We're talking about a guy, right, that is coming off of league leading sack numbers. He led the NFL in sacks this year, right? 17 and a half. The dude was an absolute force. 2 seasons back to back, putting up big numbers. You look at that and you understand why Trey Hendrickson wants a new contract. He believes he's far exceeded what the current contract is. Now, let me be clear. Just because he asked for permission to seek a trade and the Bengals have granted that does not mean Trey Hendrickson will be traded. I do expect Trey Hendrickson probably to get dealt because you have enough suitors out there that it's probably in the Bengals' best interest to entertain those set offers. And before we're all doom and gloom and saying, well, the sky is falling, the Bengals are dumb, let's talk about it. If the Bengals trade Trey Hendrickson, we're talking about the Bengals roughly having 16 million come off the cap, right? Against the salary cap this year. And that's 16 million extra that they could use to spend in free agency. And while it sucks, to have a player like Trey Hendrickson's caliber wanting to leave, you have to think about the possibilities of what that could do for the entire defense and the improvement, especially with the new defensive coordinator and Al Golden. You're still going to have Jermaine Pratt's contract come off the board at some point. The Bengals will have ample money to play with, and that's after you take care of T. Higgins. That's after you take care of a Jamar Chase. They will still have money to upgrade and make the necessary upgrades, not only to their defense, but to the starting guard position of the offensive line. We already know they moved on from Alex Kappa. They have a hole at left guard as well. They can make some necessary moves that will put them in a very prime position. So while it sucks losing a Trey Hendrickson, understanding what your needs are and what you need to address got that much clearer. Now, here's the one cool thing work for the Bengals. This year, the defensive class, right? The defensive line class in the draft is loaded with talent. It's loaded with talent. So it brings me to this point. What would Trey Hendrickson garner from a trade interest standpoint? Well, I want to talk about the two teams that have some level of interest. At least they've been reported to have some level of interest. And I want to add another third team who I've heard might have some level of interest, and that being the Detroit Lions. Well, the thing about those teams, like the Washington Commanders, who have apparently been poking around the transition situation, teams like the Atlanta Falcons, who've been poking around the transition situation, and then you look at a team like the Detroit Lions, who apparently have some rumored interest in a guy like Trey Hendrickson. I first want to start off with the Washington Commanders. What would that garner? Now, we know, right? Let's go back. The Bengals always overvalue said players. So what would a conversation starter look like for the Bengals to acquire a Trey Hendrickson? For me, it's very, very simple. I think people think that Trey Hendrickson, well, you can only garner, probably a second at best, but much more likely you're getting a third or a fourth or a fifth rounder. That's the numbers I've seen thrown out. I've seen him compared to the Hassan Reddick situation or the Khalil Mack situation when he was traded. Here's the thing. When you talk about those guys in Hassan Reddick, in Khalil Mack, neither of these guys were coming off of league leading sack numbers. So they did not garner that type of compensation. I get it. Whoever signs Trey Hendrickson is going to have to guarantee him a big deal. And for a team that made it as far as the Washington Commanders, or maybe a team like the Detroit Lions, or maybe another team that has made it pretty far, you have to think of them in win now mode. What does win now mode look like for said team? What if the Philadelphia Eagles made a play for a guy like Trey Hendrickson? But hear me out. Any conversation with these teams that are picking later in the draft, damn, am I wrong for thinking you have to start probably with that back in first round pick? I don't think a second rounder gets it done when you pick that far back in the draft. That's as good as having a third round pick, although it's still second rounder. The Bengals are looking to get ample compensation. And if you know anything about the Bengals are not going to just give the services of Trey Hendrickson away. For me, I think it really depends on who is trying to trade for the services of Trey Hendrickson. I think if it's one of these teams that we're talking about in the back end of the first round, 100% first round pick is on the table. I don't think that is out of the realm of possibility. For other teams that we're talking about, like teams like the Falcons, right? Who have the 15th overall pick, whereas opposed to the Bengals have the 17th overall pick, we might be looking at a pick swap and a third round pick compensation as well. Is that enough to get the deal done? Do the Bengals say, you know what, moving up 2 spots in the draft and getting a third round comp or maybe a fourth rounder, is that enough to move Trey Hendrickson? I don't know if Cincinnati will be willing to move Trey Hendrickson off of that, respectfully. I don't think so. And I know that might sound crazy, but moving up 2 spots in the draft, giving up an elite defensive pass rush specialist, just move up two spots in the draft. I don't know if that's a needle mover for the Bengals. The Bengals are always going to play hardball. The Bengals are always going to try to win in any type of negotiation. Certainly when you're talking about one of their elite players, they're not going to just give Trey Hendrickson away. It's the reason why when teams have traded with the Bengals in the past, the Bengals have always won. I don't think the Bengals just give Trey Hendrickson away. No matter how long this process is drawn out, no matter how long this process takes, I think all things being considered, somebody is going to have to come in with a high bid for Trey Hendrickson. They're going to have to knock the Bengals sock off and say, hey, we want Trey Hendrickson in our building. And if we're talking about these teams in the back end that say that they're missing pass rush, well, I think those conversations start with your first rounder. I think with the teams in the middle of the round, those conversations start with your second round and your third round pick. If you have a player that you want to include in the deal, maybe that'll get it over the finish line. For the Falcons, well, you have to ask yourself, how bad do we want Trey Hendrickson? If you want Trey Hendrickson bad enough, are you willing to part ways? Are you willing to do a pick swap? And maybe a Kyle Pitts? And a fourth rounder for Trey? Would that get the deal done? Maybe. Maybe. I just don't see the Bengals giving Trey Hendrickson away just to give him away. Giving permission to seek a trade versus executing a trade, 2 drastically different things. But I'm very curious to hear what you guys think in the comment section. Let me know what you think the compensation should be for a Trey Hendrickson. If you like more video content like this, give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications so you guys never miss when we go live or upload content from TWSN Studios.